where he is. Osama bin Laden has got to be defined and killed. Terrorism as an objective, as an attribute. हम बुराई से लड़ना चाहते हैं, बुरे आदमी के सामने हम उसके साथ compromise, we can have a negotiation or a dialogue with him. By default, the mindset has been that this is what I was going to say, that the biggest danger that any country's security apparatus can have is the nebulous ideas and ill-defined objectives. You aren't very sure what you want, where you want, and how do you get it. And the third side of that triad is the means, resources, and the instrumentalities through which you have to defend yourself. In this comes all your response systems, your capabilities, your infrastructure, your military preparedness, your technological advancement, etc. Now, I would like to give you a little brief this thing about what is to be protected. Just to give you an idea how big is that task. One is what we call as the physical assets of the state. And since state is a part of the nation, so they are important for the national security. The physical assets include 3.29 million square kilometers of the land of this country, 2.3 million square kilometers of exclusive economic zone, a 15,000 kilometer long border, most of it which is a hostile border. With every country except Bhutan, we have got one security problem or the other. We have got 7,000 kilometers of the coastal land which has now become vulnerable not only to the terrorists and others, but the maritime presence of China, which is coming in a big way in the Indian Ocean, has been able to establish its naval presence in Coco Island, in Myanmar, in Havan-Watata, in Sri Lanka, in Gwadar, in Pakistan, and now this thing in Seychelles, a naval base in Seychelles. It wants a naval dominance in the Indian Ocean because it feels that it can be choked at the Strait of Malacca. And if the access to South China Sea has got to be secured for it, if the control over South China Sea has got to be made possible for them, then the dominance of Indian Ocean will be absolutely necessary. And that is where, now that they are, I will come to the China portion later. But besides that, we have got a lot of strategic assets, we have got defense installations, we have got our industries, airports, outer space, cyberspace, which have become the new objects of this thing. Then, in the physical assets, beyond the physical assets, comes very important area, what we call as the people. People is an asset and a liability both. When we have to protect for the security agencies, it's a responsibility which has to be protected. And we have got 1.2 billion people with different ethnicities, languages, cultures, fault lines of their own, historical conflicts between themselves, social tensions, communal disharmony, caste competitiveness. All these factors make it a highly important area for protection. The enemy uses subversion for this thing. That is, when the enemy targets our people and tries to use them for furthering its strategic interests, that is subversion. I think the first time when Pakistan was created and Mr. Qurban Ali, who was one of the senior most intelligence officers in the British time in India, in the Intelligence Bureau, who became the Chief of Intelligence in 1953, he made a monograph, which was their policy doctrine, that Balkanization of India is a historical inevitability. Whenever that takes place, Muslims will constitute the biggest chunk in which Pakistan will have the greatest interest. And therefore, this constituency has got to be cultivated. And for that, a consistent effort was made by them, I think not very successfully, that they tried to see if they could have their areas of interest in the population, whether it was in Kashmir or whether it is in other parts of India, whether it was in Northeast, where they tried to subvert the people. The Chinese tried to subvert, as General Secretary said, about this thing in the Northeast. So the protection of the people, and then of course their physical protection and safety. And then the third thing that the state has to protect itself, it's its polity, its infrastructure, its constitution. Most of the, in the post-war period, 43 states have undergone failure or degradation, out of which 38 were because of the internal security factors, and the internal security, it was the failure of their internal security mechanism. It was not the wars from outside. Whether it was Pakistan which got divided in two, or it is Bangladesh, it was USSR that got splintered, or it is East Timor that was created, or it is Nepal which lost its monarchy. It was due to the internal factors where your system of polity or constitutionality became a victim of your internal this thing. Now, we face the threats both from inside and outside to all these factors. But in today's world, what has become is that the wars have increasingly become cost-ineffective instruments of achieving your policy objectives. Whether the Americans trying to achieve their policy objectives in Vietnam or in Afghanistan or in Iraq, the powers which were militarily, technologically, economically much inferior to them, the superpowers were not able to have their way out. So increasingly now we are getting into the fourth generation warfare. Now the warfare has undergone various things. We had a first generation warfare after the Treaty of Westphalia in 1648. And then we had this thing of the columns, and then we had the blistering during the second war. And now we are getting into the fourth generation warfare, the warfare that will be fought within the civil society, where the enemy will be camouflaged within the civil society, and it will be the responsibility of the security apparatus to protect the civil society and at the same time destroy the enemy which is hidden there. And in this type of civil war, that is why the civil society becomes the most important instrument in having this thing. The people who will be able, the regimes that will be able to control and win these wars will be one which have the highest legitimacy and credibility, and the intelligence capabilities to fight the invisible enemies. If the Americans couldn't do in Afghanistan what they wanted to, it is not that they were militarily inferior. It's not that they weren't able to put the money, they were putting $10 billion a year. It's not that their equipment was inferior. It is because they were not differentiate who is a friend and who is an enemy. So this battle against the invisible enemy is something that becomes unwinnable unless you have got the support of the people. And that is how the cohesion of the civil society becomes extremely important, and the adversarial forces will always try to divide the society, fracture the society on whatever possible fault lines it can. That can be forces within and that can be forces outside. Something has been said about our external threats. China was referred by John Shagatka, but I will not go into that, but I would just like to tell one thing, that is the strategic differential between China and India is increasing very fast. It is likely to continue at least for next 10 years. And by about 2030, their military will be about $1.3 trillion higher in terms of equipment. They are going with this thing for the reorganization of the PLA and its modernization. They have been able to develop their own capabilities of manufacturing aircraft. After the Soviet Union's degradation, they were able to bring all the scientists from there. They were able to have the arrangements of shifting the equipment from there, and they started manufacturing in a big way, including the reverse engineering. And now they have got their K-17 airplanes that they are making. They are assembling their own aircraft carrier. They have developed the outer space capability by hitting at a satellite, which was their own satellite, but they have demonstrated that they can take on in the outer space. Their naval capability is increasing at a very fast rate. And of course, their missiles are one of the DF-21, which they have developed, a DF-21D version, which will be able to take on any of the aircraft carriers if it comes in the South China Sea, and also the missiles that their naval ships will be able to carry would be quite devastating in the Indian Ocean region. Having said all that, China has also got very serious problems to which they are heading. Besides the internal problems that were briefly there too, China's population is now going to become an aging population. 2030 onwards, it will not be able to have a standing army of 2.3 million that it has got presently. It is also that India is not only going to remain the world's youngest population, but will also be able to spare a huge manpower for its security forces. It is also increasing technologically, because most of the technology that China is depending on is a borrowed technology which is getting dated. And since its international acceptance is much low, nobody is going to spare the modern technology to them. Whereas India is today a most acceptable state, its rise is not seen as an aggressive rise or a rise which endangers anybody's or threatens the international global order. Therefore, India will be able to induct the new technology which has already started. A good number of our new defense public sector units and some of the programs that we are having in the space and even in the missile systems, etc., they are coming up very well. If within the next 5 to 10 years, if we are able to really indigenize our production and go for the greater technological induction in our defense capabilities, we would be able to do much better. In addition, India has got the advantage that its acceptability in the region beyond Pakistan, in the immediate in the Southeast Asian region and others, probably is much more higher. But why does China want? What does China want out of India? Does it want to rule India? What does it want? What are its strategic gains against it? What are its strategic objectives against India? It's very important. They want to contain India. They want to contain India, that India is not seen as a rival power center within Asia. If it is so, then China will not be able to have its global supremacy. If it has to have a global supremacy, it first will have to establish the regional supremacy. And if India assumes that regional supremacy, in that situation, there will be a clustering that will come around India, and that is what exactly is happening. Whether we see it in the ASEAN countries as new positions of the quadrilateral that is coming, or even in the West Asian countries, and of course the West also is very keen that does not happen, that China is able to have the domination. So India would be able to position itself. It's only how best we'll play our cards. We need some Chanakyas to really understand the fast changing dynamics, and while we cannot mortgage our strategic and security interest to the West, at the same time we can play the advantage of the vacuum that is created by the distrust against Pakistan and the image of Pakistan as a failing state, for the filling up that space and using it for building our capabilities. I would not like to take much of your time, but I would like to say one thing about the security, that most important thing that India has to think is about the security ideas. It is ideas from where the policies emerge. And from the policies, the strategies come, and from the strategies, then we put our resources, we build our tactics, we decide our military objectives. Somehow, we had been working on very faulty security ideas in this country. One of the ideas after independence was, why do we need an army? We don't have any extraterritorial ambitions, and why should any country attack us? I do not know how many of you collect. General Cariappa himself had to go to tell Mahatma Gandhi that don't disband the army. But it was an idea, and it was a wrong idea. But what a damage a wrong idea can do. Similarly, there was an idea that peace can be bought by appeasement and concessions, and personal friendships and equations can have a precedence over geopolitical realities. We did it in Tibet. We thought that we give this concession to China in Tibet. Probably China in return will be our friend. We pleaded their case in the United Nations. We did the same thing during the Shimla Accord. It was the mindset. That is, we be generous, we give them this thing, we don't insist about settlement of Kashmir, we release their troops, and we probably would be able to get their friendship, and in return, we will be a friendly country. It will not be a friendly country. They have a compulsive hostility. An enemy has to be defined, and if enemy has to be defined, as long as its enemy character continues to be there, as long as it perpetrates itself, the enemy, there is no other option but the enemy has to be destroyed. There can't be any two options about that. Similarly, there is another theory on which we are working, that the economic growth by itself is a guarantor of India's security. It is not. Actually, India has suffered in the past, historically. Its worst, it became provocative for the invaders to come to India when it was at the height of its economic prosperity. Immediately after the Gupta Empire, we found that they felt that Hindustan sone ki chidiya hai, and that is the place. Economic prosperity is a means to an end and not an end itself. We have to become economically prosper so that we can make this a strong country. We have to build our defense capabilities, we have to build our social order, we have to give the cohesion of the society and strengthen our civilizational values to make it a unified, organic, vibrant state. If we fail to do that, then our economic capability itself will not be an insurer and a guarantor of India's security. The third, this thing on which we had been working is that if the facts are in your favor and you're justified and you are correct, then the international opinion will always stand by you. International opinion will always tilt in favor of the party which is stronger in a conflict, or where their own vested interests are involved. We took our case to the J&K thinking that the international community will castigate Pakistan and say that you have sent your troops into a sovereign state of the other member country and therefore as per your charter you should vacate those areas. They never did it. They will never do it. On terrorism, we never got any comfort till it was 2001. From 1980, India was suffering terrorism and we had been taking it up with all the international bodies. We found that there was a greater acceptance of Pakistan's position on Kashmir than of India, and but for the veto that was exercised by the Russians at that time, consistently the Western countries had supported Pakistani position on Kashmir, not because of the merits, not because they were not convinced that a princely state was quite justified in signing that instrument of accession in favor of India, and therefore it was an integral part of India, but because Pakistan was a member of a CENTO, Baghdad Pact, or part of their military alliance. Similarly, if we have got a problem with China tomorrow, probably if the American interests are very heavily embedded with China, we should not be expecting that India will be getting a great succor and comfort and space over there just because you are correct and justified. You will be supported only in case you are strong. Everybody appeared to be against us when we went nuclear. But just because we went nuclear, that the acceptance of India, and they said it's not only an emerging power, but an emerging power. If you are strong, everyone is your friend. I think Dinkar's very famous lines, कि इतिहास दुनिया की सबसे बड़ी अदालत है. इस अदालत में फैसला सत्य के पक्ष में नहीं, शक्ति के पक्ष में हुआ है. If you are strong, you will be justified. If your claim is not supported by the proportionate strength, you will not be able to do that. There was a theory in 1954 when we brought about our industrial policy in 1956 that India's defense autarky, India's in terms of its equipment, weapons, etc., will automatically come through if India is industrially developed. If India is industrially developed, then it will have the technology, it will have the basic industries, it will have steel industry, it will have heavy machine building and others, and therefore, either we can make a tractor or we can make a tank, just the same. It is not just the same. It's a wrong mindset, it's a wrong theory. You work on the wrong ideas and you land up in trouble. That is why we have landed in a trouble that a country of 120 crore people, which has got the largest technological pool, which has got all the ingredients of making the best alloys from which the steels, the cobalt steels and nickel steels, etc., are made, from which the armament factories are this thing. That is, India still is the world's biggest importers of arms and weapons. It's a pity. If we do not purchase, those factories will get closed. And we have got the capital, we have got the manpower, we have got the market, we have got the demand. And at the same time, we are totally dependent, not only that we are importing, but should we engage and use those weapons in a military engagement, which is not to the interest of the suppliers of those weapons, they stop the spares. And not only that, if Whenever any engagement starts and then the spares are required at that point of time, you can't have the redundancy factor indefinitely, you cannot keep the spares, this thing, they are at such exorbitant costs and come with so much of a delays of time. So India's first priority now should be that we should, in next 10 years, today we are about 30% dependent, but we should become more than 70 to 75 dependent on our indigenous equipment. And what we call as our indigenous equipment today in our ordnance factories should all get privatized. They are making low quality, low technical input items which can be privatized. The public sector undertakings and the ordnance factory should go only for high technology equipment. The DRDO supported our original designs, our original architect, which has got an element of surprise, which has got an element of it's greater the suitability to our terrain and our geographical conditions. We should go for that sort of an equipment. Otherwise, we will always be dependent and we will never be able to become a self-reliant defense power. Civilizational issues have not only lost their validity but has become an unacceptable world. I think if India has really to emerge, presume a situation 100 years later, in case you have got a democratic society and a democratic constitution, and India continues to remain a member of the United Nations, but you cannot hold Durga Puja in Calcutta or Ganesh Utsav in this thing because somebody says that it is not acceptable, assembly has passed a law on that. Or if you find that people of a certain this thing, because a demographic change has taken place, that the total cultural character of the society undergoes a change. Will you say that India is a very major power? India has taken as a power which has become the world's biggest or the second biggest economy, it has got the world's biggest army, it has got the biggest defense forces and others. But it has lost its character as the Indian state. So that civilizational preservation, and that actually is the cement, that actually is the adhesive that can make this country great. And if you really want to build this India, the work that I think organizations like Bharatiya Vichar Manch are doing and so many other organizations which are doing are extremely important. Involve the people, that is Indian nationhood goes beyond Indian statehood. We are the members of the state from the point of our death, from the point of our birth to the time of our death. We are the subjects of the state under the constitution, but we are members of the nation. Even those who were our ancestors were members of this nation, and our progeny which has to come will also be the member of this nation. That is something which is infinite and which is immortal. Thank you very much.